Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm 45 years old. I work in the East End of London in a pub called the Sun Inn in Bethnal Green Road. I'm a transsexual, a male to female transsexual. I transitioned around about 7 years ago. In fact, I can remember the day quite well when I signed my change of name documentation. That was we're coming up to that anniversary. That was the 3rd of October 2003.
So you said you're born in the Northeast and you lived all around the UK and then now you're in Essex.
Yeah, I guess if we're going to do the whole childhood thing, I was born in the, well, obviously in the mid-60s. My father is a retired Methodist minister. My mother was a teacher. She died when I was 18. Life growing up in the Methodist Church, especially if your father is a Methodist minister, is a succession of moves, and by the time I was 11, I think I've been to about 6 different schools, so you get used to moving, you get used to change. Actually, change being a fairly constant theme, I guess. I suppose for that reason I've always been one to look on change as opportunity rather than threat. Where I know so many people tend to get very suspicious about change and what it represents to them. As I mentioned earlier, I'm transsexual. As far as growing up is concerned, I think that was something that I'd always tried very hard to suppress, or subconsciously even suppressed. I'm not too sure which it was. I have very few memories of childhood. All I'm conscious of the fact was I found it very difficult to socialise, make friends. Whether that was a consequence of the fact that I was never in the same place long enough to make friends, or whether it was more something a little deeper, I don't know. And 3 years of psychotherapy in later life still haven't, uncovered any answers for me. I guess I did all the things that people in my situation do when they're young, dressing up in private. That's been there, done that. In fact, I remember a very painful, in the embarrassing sense, conversation with my parents when they found out, when they told me that if I didn't stop, they'd have to take me to see somebody. Now, I mean, that wasn't helpful at the time. I think I was about 14 or 15 at the time. There are things that resonated from around there. I mean, I remember in particular the tennis player Rennie Richards and her transition and her challenge to the US professional tour to be allowed to compete with other women, something which, as I recall, she was unsuccessful in achieving. I remember at the time thinking, I can only put it as, oh God, please don't let me be like that. And very strange thing for an 11-year-old to think about, but there was clearly something resonating even then. The fact that I was actually identifying with her at that stage suggests I was all too conscious of what was actually going on at the time. Anyway, I didn't do anything about it at the time, and my parents didn't do anything about it at the time, and in some ways I regret the missed opportunity, because I spent the next 20 plus years trying to assimilate, to conform, suppressing something inside me that, you know, clearly was a very big part of me, and being less than complete as a result of that. As I say, the inability to socialise, to form relationships, that was a constant excuse me, that was a constant feature.
So how did you get married? How did you form that relationship? Or didn't you?
University was, I suppose, the icebreaker for me. I make the joke about being the only girl at an all-boys school. Of course, no one knew that at the time. And even the youth organisations I belonged to were boys only. You know, I went to the Scouts. So opportunities to socialise with girls was very, very limited. I mean, university was an icebreaker to a certain extent, and I did form a relationship when I was there for a couple of years, but that didn't survive after I graduated. When I returned back to London and read for the bar. Didn't pass the finals, but ended up working in the legal profession within the for a firm of solicitors, local government, and ultimately with the Crown Prosecution Service. But round about then got drawn into a local church youth group, which was on the point of closure. It was in my own church, Methodist Church in Barkingside, and that was where I met Wendy, and it was love at first sight as far as I'm concerned, and I spent the next year making an absolute idiot of myself until we actually went out on our first date. We were married 2 or 3 years later in 1993 and remained married for about 10 years. I'd like to say that everything in the garden was rosy, but it wasn't. I became ill with depression in about 1997, shortly after I'd transferred from the Crown Prosecution Service to the Office of the Parliamentary Ombudsman in Millbank. That was, I think, I didn't enjoy the commute for a start. I was living out in Grays in Essex by that time. I found the journey difficult. There were a very different environment from the one I was used to at the Crown Prosecution Service. The pace of life at the Ombudsman's office was far slower. There were very few positive stresses, and I'm one of those people who thrive on challenge and the pressure of short deadlines and quick turnover of work. There was none of that there, and I think that was one of the reasons why I just found it so very difficult to settle. But I became depressed, although at the time it was identified as chronic fatigue syndrome. I think that's another label people use quite a lot because of the stigma that is associated with mental health issues. Be that as it may, I spent much of the next 2 years working from home on a relatively infrequent basis, but also spending a lot of time unable to move, really, just sort of vegged out on the sofa, not doing anything, just staring blankly into space. Around about the same time, I bought a computer because I was working from home, and because the office officially didn't have a home working policy. What I did was set myself up as a home worker, provided my own equipment, so that I could actually continue to function in the workplace. And it was during one of those days off work that, for reasons I still don't know or still can't remember, I actually logged on to a transgender website. Can't remember which one it was. And at the time there were a huge number of them out there, and it clicked. I mean, again, it brought back a lot of associations, and particularly with the behaviour that I tried to suppress very hard when I was a teenager. Things kind of developed from there, I guess. Unfortunately, and I can't, I can't attribute any blame to Wendy for this. It was not something that she found it easy to accept, and when it became clear that that I was not just a cross-dresser, but someone who felt the need to transition and go through a process of gender reassignment, that was the end of our relationship. That hit me very, very hard, and the depression effectively deepened at that point. I found it, for a while, I was pretty much completely dysfunctional, to the point of suicidal. But there again, that's not unusual, and certainly when I have this conversation with friends, it's like we're all ticking the same boxes in some ways, been there, done that. After about 2002, it was no longer enough just being me at home. I felt the need to be out and about, to come out, and it's a cliche. I don't know how I feel about the expression, but in some ways, yes, I seem to have spent my time hiding in closets of one kind or another. But it was about 2002, 2003 that I started socialising, and in the meantime I'd still been using the MSN chat rooms to make a lot of friends, and it was a great chance to meet a lot of them as well. So I ended up frequenting a club in Stepney Green, based in a pub called the Black Horse. It's no longer there now, closed down 2 or 3 years ago. But it hosted, I think I could best describe it as a tribute night to the late Ron Storm, whose associations with the East End of London dated back to the late 60s, and his club Travesty Night, which used to be hosted at the George in Stepney on the Commercial Road. I met a lot of people there, mostly based around the drag queen and the transvestite scene. And after a while, it was clear to me that we didn't really have that much in common. But I met a lot of friends among the rest of the clientele of the pub, not just those that came dressed up.